Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Kenny McBride and joining us today is Ruth Watson from Scotland the Brand, Keep Scotland the Brand, and we'll be talking to her very shortly about all the news of the day. Welcome, Ruth.
Hello.
So first of all, news today of the Scottish Greens have elected new co-leaders to replace the co-convener title that those people held previously. Patrick Harvie has been elected, and a new woman has been elected as the other co-leader, a woman named Lorna Slater. This announcement was made today in Edinburgh, and Broadcasting Scotland was there to ask a few questions of the new leaders. We've got a wee video package to show you from there.
To announce and hand over to our new party co-leaders, Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater.
So we're here with Maggie Chapman, the outgoing co-convener of the Scottish Green Party. So first of all, commiserations, obviously. How do you feel about the election and the result?
Well, obviously, personally, I'm disappointed, but today isn't about me. It's not about any of us as individuals. It's about us as a party coming together and looking ahead to what will be significant challenges, not only for us internally as a party as we deal with new structures and new systems, but if we look at politics more generally in Scotland and globally, there is so much uncertainty around whether it's around our economic situation, whether it's around climate breakdown, and we know we've got a very, very short time to deal with these huge challenges. I still believe that the Greens are the party with the ideas and the approach to bring our country to a different kind of politics and a different kind of economy, one that puts people before profit and communities before corporations.
So as you say, there are a number of crises facing us between Brexit, the climate crisis, and all kinds of other issues around the world and at home. What would you say is the top priority, given that there's so much division of people's attention at the moment?
I think the number one thing for me and for the party is and remains climate breakdown. There's no point in trying to tinker around the edges of a system that is destroying our planet. We need a new economic system, and we need to renew our society to go with that renewed economic system, so that we have a system that doesn't end in our death. If the climate report that came out last year says we've got 11 years to act, I don't see the kind of urgent and transformational changes required happening yet. So I know that both Patrick and Lorna and Greens across Scotland will be pushing that agenda as their number one priority, because we've only got 11 years to save the planet.
Now, obviously, the Greens have quite a strong pro-independence strand to their thinking. How do you think that will make an impact in being able to address the climate crisis?
Well, I think it's interesting. In the independence referendum of 2014, that was when many more people than ever before began to understand what green politics was all about. And I think that context is still there. We can be talking about a different kind of country and use that as a way of also talking about a different kind of economy and a different kind of society. And I think our commitment to independence is about democracy and it's about power. And we know that if we are to solve the climate crisis and the economic crisis, we need to do radically different things with power too. And so for us, well, for me, that goes hand in hand with independence. It's about bringing power closer to people, giving people more control over their everyday lives. It's about having power at the lowest possible level, and for me, that should rest with communities and people across Scotland.
And where would you say that the pressure points are, where the Greens can make a difference, firstly at Holyrood and also at Westminster?
Well, I think we've had great success in the past in being able to push the Scottish Government in certain directions. So we know that the declaration of a climate emergency that we heard Nicola Sturgeon state earlier this year was off the back of pressure from us, off the back of pressure from Extinction Rebellion and the school climate strikers. And it's that way of doing politics differently that I talked about. Greens working with social movements beyond party politics and beyond parliamentary politics, that is really key. I think probably the pressure point for us has to be around our energy transformation. We know that with our idea of a Green New Deal, we can completely transform our energy infrastructure in Scotland, move away from fossil fuels, move away from the fuels that are strangling and killing our planet. And that I know will continue to be one of the priorities of the team in Parliament and the party overall.
Okay, Maggie Chapman, thank you very much for your service over the last few years, and congratulations, whatever you do in the future now. Thank you so much. So Patrick, we're here with you now as returned again as the co-leader of the Scottish Green Party. How do you feel about that?
Well, very happy, also very energised by the debate that we've just had. It's the first time we've had so many candidates standing, not just for the co-leader positions or the equivalent that were there before, but for all the elected positions within the party. There's been a real buzz and energy about the debate, about the direction that the party needs to take, and the work that needs to happen and is already getting underway, preparing us for the 2021 election. The local elections the year after that, and who knows, potentially snap UK election, second EU referendum, who knows, maybe even a second independence referendum as well.
So what would you say are your top priorities going into this new period of leadership?
Green politics is the answer to a great many of the concerns that people have, and in particular, obviously, the growing level of awareness of the climate emergency, not just the fact of it, not just the scale of it, but the requirement for a transformational agenda for our whole economy. You know, climate change does not require us to change our light bulbs or change our cars. It requires us to change our economy and the way that we live. It requires us to stop allowing the extraction of wealth from our economy by those who are only interested in their own short-term interests. And the way that we're running our economy is unhealthy for people and unhealthy for the planet. And it's green ideas that can actually set out a positive vision, a way of charting, for example, how Scotland will generate high-quality, rewarding jobs for the future, prosperity that can be fairly shared in the age after the fossil fuel industry, which everybody knows we cannot rely on going forward. Green ideas like the Green New Deal are about investing in that positive future. We're not seeing that transformational agenda coming from any other political party.
Now, when you speak about a Green New Deal, this is obviously a term that we've heard a lot in the American context recently. What do you think that would look like in the Scottish context?
Yeah, some people on the progressive side of the US Democrats have been talking about Green New Deal. Actually, the idea came from this country in the first place. In the wake of the financial crash and the failure of the deregulated free market model, people started talking about what a Green New Deal would look like as a response to that economic crisis, as well as the social and environmental crises that people are living with. So that remains the purpose of it. In the Scottish context, we're going to be publishing more information over the coming months about our proposals in the run-up to the 2021 election. We need to be looking at what the Scottish Government can do with its existing powers. At the moment, for example, it's still supporting unsupportable industries in our view, whether that's the fossil fuel industries, whether it's things like the arms trade, are getting public money, taxpayers' money, to create jobs in industries that are not good value for money, should not be the future of our economy, and that's a missed opportunity for investment in the transformational change, whether in our energy system, in our built environment, the high quality, affordable, warm homes that people need, in things like public transport, in waste reduction. There's a whole host of areas where work needs doing and public investment needs to be leading the change. Greens have set out proposals for how that can happen in the past. We'll continue to do that over the coming months and in the year and a half or so that we've got until the Holyrood election. We also need to go beyond and push beyond the limits of what devolution currently sets out and make sure that we're setting out a vision for what Scotland's role could be in the world if we are that independent European country that so many people in Scotland aspire to be.
And are there specific areas where you think the Scottish Government is currently ripe for a bit of green input?
The Scottish Government, I think, have talked a good game on a number of issues, whether that's around setting targets for climate change, but they've not then followed through with recognising that their policy of maximum oil and gas extraction is incompatible with those targets. They talked a good game on things like land reform, but then they've rejected our proposals for taking that agenda through to its natural conclusion. They talked a good game on protecting communities, but then, for example, when we proposed legislation to regulate the short-term letting industry, which is taking huge numbers of homes out of circulation as actual homes and turning them into effectively hotel businesses, unregulated and untaxed, we proposed legislation to deal with that, and the Scottish Government first of all kind of thought they might work with us on that and ended up going with the Conservatives to water that down. So yeah, there are opportunities to push the government to go further on many of the things that their own members and supporters want them to be doing better, want them to be more radical and more ambitious on. It's green ideas that will push them in the right direction.
Now, obviously, there is another complication with Scotland in that there are powers that are reserved that the Scottish Government doesn't necessarily have any power over, and the Scottish Greens have no representation at Westminster. How do you think the Scottish Greens can interject themselves into UK politics on these kind of issues?
I think one of the things to remember on this question about the limits of devolution as they stand now, one of the things to remember is that poem that celebrated the opening of the Scottish Parliament. What people want is not a Parliament of fealties. You know, this Scottish Parliament has developed, has grown in its authority, in its competence, very often by straining at the boundaries of what is possible. You know, I would say even Jack McConnell's administration did that on issues like protection for asylum seekers and some kind of flexibility on immigration. The UK government didn't fully respect that, but the effect was to grow the confidence and the authority of the Scottish Parliament. More recently, on things, whether it's around the Brexit agenda, responding to that crisis, whether indeed it's the use of new tax powers, and the Scottish Greens have shown how we can go beyond the limits of what people thought were possible on fiscal matters. The Scottish Parliament needs to, yes, recognise that devolution exists. It is a limitation, but we need to be straining against the limits of those powers. We need to be demonstrating by our actions that we've got far more potential as a country to go beyond those limitations. That's the way that the Scottish Parliament will continue to grow in authority and confidence. That's the way that people in Scotland who were open-minded about independence but ultimately maybe didn't vote for it last time, those are the people that we need to win over, and we can do that by demonstrating what Scotland is capable of if it has the confidence to strike out in its own way, not in any way hostile to our neighbours south of the border, but demonstrating that Scotland as an independent country within the family of European nations can be a better place to live and a good global citizen.
Patrick Harvey, congratulations again, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Lorna, first of all, congratulations. Now, obviously, you're not a particularly well-known face in Scottish politics, or at least not yet. So could you tell the viewers just a little bit about where you're from, how you got involved in the Green movement?
Absolutely. So I'm Lorna Slater. I was born in Canada, and I am an electromechanical engineer. I currently work in tidal energy. So I'm a surger. That is, I joined the Green Party as part of the Green Surge after the independence referendum, when the party membership went from 2,000 to sort of 10,000 in a matter of weeks. I was one of those people. And I can't even say why there was such a sort of communal, everybody do this, that happened. For me, I had always been a Green voter, and seeing the Green Yes campaign convinced me that the Greens were a political force to be reckoned with, and that it was worth sort of putting my shoulder in the harness and helping the Green movement move forward.
And so what then caused you to run for the leadership? I mean, that seems like a big jump for an awful lot of people.
Well, I've been working behind the scenes in the Scottish Green Party for several years. For the last 3 years, I've held the post of Operations Co-Convener, which was responsible for all the behind-the-scenes stuff, looking after the staff, the premises, getting conference organised, keeping our IT systems going, fundraising, finance, all that sort of stuff. So I've had a behind-the-scenes leadership role in the party for a number of years. But I have also stood as a candidate, and I quite enjoy the public speaking, public debate about politics, and getting the word out there. I really like speaking with people and listening to voters. So I thought this was a chance to bring both of those skills together.
And so would you say that your your role now is going to be predominantly behind the scenes, or do you expect to be more of a public figure?
I absolutely expect to be a public figure. It's a spokesperson role. The membership of the Scottish Greens will expect me to communicate their messages, to communicate the Green message out there, and that's what I'm here to do, to tell the right stories. I am also a very hands-on person though, and I can't communicate messages on my own. Our best mechanism for communication is our active membership. So I will be working to help our members become active, teaching skills sessions, knocking on doors with them, getting around to branches, and just working with all of our members to get out and to work with me. I can't do it on my own.
Okay, now we know that obviously dealing with climate change and dealing with some of the exploitative nature of our economic system is core to the Green movement. What would you say are your personal priorities going into this new role?
Well, my personal priorities are all about winning the next Holyrood election. We missed out last time around on getting 4 excellent Green women elected. That's not going to happen again under my watch. We're going to have at least 5 of the lists will be headed by women and more women in winnable places. I want to get more Green women into Holyrood than before. We need that diversity of voices. We have a lot of women with experience and knowledge in different fields, and that's going to be my focus, is to support those women and get them elected.
Lorna Slater, congratulations again, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So that was Maggie Chapman, the outgoing co-convener of the Green Party in Scotland, and Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater, who have just been elected as the new co-leaders of the party. So, Ruth, there we are. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
So, I don't know how much of that those interviews you heard. We're just talking about the new leadership of the Scottish Greens. What do you think the role of the Scottish Greens is in Scottish politics?
I'm afraid I didn't hear any of the interview, but as far as I'm aware, the Greens play a significant part in making sure that environmental issues and social issues are well up the agenda. I'm very impressed with the work that Andy Whiteman does. And I've heard him speak on a few occasions, and he always comes across.
We're not hearing you.
Are you able to hear me at all?
That's better.
Oh, hang on, I don't know. Is it this thing I'm meant to be talking into? I'm afraid I don't. I've borrowed my daughter's, so I'm not sure what I'm doing.
We try again?
Try now.
Sorry.
Okay, can we try that, Ruth?
Hello?
You're coming on and off. Speak that again. Right.
Oh.
Oops.
Well, we appear to have lost Ruth, so we will come back to her as soon as we can. In the meantime, we shall discuss a little bit about our next story, which is on the Ferguson's Yard in Port Glasgow. There was a meeting held just today or yesterday, excuse me, with the Greenock and Inverclyde MSP Stuart McMillan, who has been working hard to try and ensure that Ferguson stays open. Many of you will remember back in 2014, at the height of the referendum campaign, it seemed like Ferguson's, which was the last yard on the Lower Clyde, was going to close, and then Jim McCall generously stepped in and took over. At that point, Calmac was supposed to get 2 ferries there, 2 new hybrid ferries built there, and this has now been going on for some time.
Yes.
So I understand that we do have Ruth back now. Hello Ruth, how are you?
Hello, hi, sorry, I have a bit of a technical glitch.
That's
so
great, and we can hear you loud and clear now, which is excellent.
Technology to me.
So, sorry, just to go back there, we were talking about the role of the Greens in Scottish politics. Would you like to just finish your thought there?
Well, I'm very impressed with the way that the Greens approach politics. I like the fact although from Keep Scotland Brand's point of view, I mean, obviously the campaign is not a party political campaign, but as somebody who worked as a journalist for many years and was involved in interviewing politicians and watching politics, being a bit of a political junkie for many years, I'm very interested by the role the Greens play within Scottish politics, because being a European-wide party, I think that they do bring an interesting perspective to politics in Scotland, and it's always interesting to hear what they have to say about issues.
That's great. So one of the things that Patrick Harvie suggested was that the Greens would be trying very hard to push the SNP, or the Scottish Government, to be a much more radical, not just obviously on environmental issues, where I think more and more people now recognise there is a need for some quite radical action, but also on economic issues, and particularly on kind of redistributing power. Do you think that's something that the Scottish Government needs, or do you think the Greens are really just pushing out an open door there?
I think that every government, regardless of its political hue, needs to have effective opposition. I think that part of the problem that we're seeing in UK politics at the moment is that there is no effective opposition. I think that watching the Greens in Scotland and further afield across Europe, I think they do have a very important role to play in driving forward social issues, social justice issues, and crucially environmental issues, which for decades people have been trying to prioritise, and you know, there is no planet B, so having a party which has as its agenda looking at policies from perhaps a more holistic point of view, I think that is very valuable, and if they are looking at a bigger picture and not just not just sort of the mundane, you know, who can get the best tax breaks for very wealthy people, I think that's always going to provide interesting debate.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that Lorna Slater, the newly elected co-leader of the party, was talking about quite a lot, is that she's very keen to get more women into the Scottish Parliament. The Greens, of course, have a very strong commitment in theory to getting more women into politics and more women into leadership positions. But at present they have one of the least gender balanced groups in the Scottish Parliament. How important do you think it is to get more women into these promoted posts, into the more visible posts, the more powerful posts in politics?
I think if you look at what happened in Norway, where they made the commitment to have a sort of gender balanced political scene, and in fact also looking at the directorships and the boards of directors and management structures, that's been very effective. You can, positive discrimination has many downsides. I've seen that for myself living in Malaysia, where positive discrimination has perhaps ceased to have a useful function, but still continues, and there are many interesting issues around that. But certainly for women to be put into positions, to have access to positions, means that we are more likely to then naturally develop skills across the board. So you're not looking at, well, is it women or is it men, or is it down to ethnic diversity? Because what we should be aiming for is so many capable people and a well of capable people who are networking and are colourblind and gender blind, that the best person comes forward. Naturally, there's definitely a lot to be said that we tend to promote the people we feel familiar with. So if you have male-only boards, and you're generally going to get the pale male and stale continuing. So I think that working to have women in power and women in powerful positions it does mean that you start getting different perspectives, and for sure it's inspirational. I went to a suffragette school in Edinburgh. The school I went to was started by suffragettes because they wanted for the girls going to those schools, or going to that school, to have positive role models, and for that reason it was only women who were allowed on the board, and it wasn't until the Equal Opportunities Act in the 1970s that we had our first male teachers coming in. So women ran the shop, and the whole ethos behind that was to empower the girls that went there. And actually, looking around me, I think that I think it worked. I think it was a very successful model. So I think that giving women an opportunity, making a commitment to have an opportunity for gender equality, means that hopefully these things will evolve naturally.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And now we are going to move on to this next story. We started to discuss this while we lost you there for a moment. This is about the Ferguson's shipyard in Port Glasgow, which in 2014 was threatened with closure. Jim McCall, the very wealthy supporter of independence, stepped in at the time, bought up the yard, and CalMac had arranged a contract to build 2 new hybrid vessels there. But sadly, there have been various complications with the designs of these ships that has caused significant cost overruns, something in the order of £60 million. There is now significant doubt about whether the yard can even continue to operate. I wonder, Ruth, what do you think about this? It seems like there's a tension between people arguing that the Scottish Government should just nationalise the yard to protect those jobs and to protect the idea really of shipbuilding on the Clyde. This is the only civilian yard that's left. And others are saying that it should somehow survive in private ownership because we can't afford to be propping up failing industries. What do you think about that? Do you think nationalisation is an appropriate way forward for important industries that are struggling?
Well, I think you have to take each thing on a case-by-case basis, but here we are just talking about the importance of green and environmental issues in politics. We can't continue. I think it was yesterday I saw an article saying that the world had just reached a point where there were 225,000 flights in one day globally. How is that sustainable? So I think that looking at hybrid technology for shipping, I've seen some really interesting discussions about, for example, super tankers which have got sail technology on them. Surely this is the kind of technology that we need to be moving forward with. So I suppose one argument could be, can we afford not to have this technology on the go? And if we do want to have more green technology coming into infrastructure like our shipping, and Scotland has there's a lot of ships coming in and out of Scotland, then we have the potential to be at the forefront of a technology which could be environmentally extremely important. So I suppose there's an argument to be made that can we afford not to have this technology being developed, and do we want to miss the opportunity to be at the forefront of a plant that can, a shipbuilding yard that can deliver those ships? So perhaps countries do need to invest and have their governments step in to help a business move forward, where you've got the potential to be at the front of something really significant and globally important.
And do you think that the fact that it is shipbuilding on the Clyde, how big a difference do you think that makes in the decision making of our politicians, given that it is this iconic industry that has played such a big role in the history of the Clyde? Do you think that's a big factor, that maybe there's an emotional drive to save shipbuilding where there might not be for certain other industries?
I think we have to ask ourselves just how important do we view keeping skills and traditions and jobs in areas that have suffered massive losses of self-respect and yeah, I do think that it's absolutely the case that shipbuilding on the Clyde, it's iconic. It's like losing the Arbroath Smoky. It's like it's people have an idea of this is what our identity is, and I can accept that there may well be a case. I mean, nobody makes suits for, you don't see sort of suits for knights in armour still being made at blacksmiths. So I understand that there's some traditions evolve and move on, but I do think that there's something to be said about showing communities which have lost a lot of self-respect or been hammered really with the sort of the post-industrialised age. I think that keeping ships on the Clyde is of value for a number of reasons. Partly strategic, because the reason the Clyde was picked as a shipbuilding area, the reason it developed, was because of its strategic location. So there's a number of reasons why you want to keep the industries there. Part of it is to show people that you actually value the human element and the social element that goes into those traditions and those industries as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. We now have another story, quite a different kind of story. This was a number of residents in Edinburgh who have been targeted in what appears to be a scam. On the 15th and the 31st of July, 2 residents on visas were reported being contacted by somebody claiming to be from the Home Office and who alleged that they were under investigation. They were told that their options were either to immediately return to India, to be held in UK Border Force custody, or to pay a sum of money for a temporary visa to remain in the UK until the matter was resolved. On both occasions, the call does appear to have been made by a genuine Home Office number, and one of the men received a call from 999 when he didn't answer. And between them, these men have been scammed out of over £1,000. Now, obviously, scammers can attack anyone at any time. But in this particular case, first of all, it seems to have been quite a sophisticated effort, being able to use somewhat genuine Home Office phone numbers to make these calls. But what do you think? Do you think that there's a problem here of exposing people to this kind of scam when the Home Office has been so aggressive in driving people out of the country? The whole hostile environment policy.
There are two aspects to that story. One of which is it is very, very hard to be sure that you're not being scammed when phone numbers come up and looking as though they're genuine. There's been a number of cases where scammers have managed some very it just takes a computer and a bit of software, but it makes it look as though you're being called by somebody who's genuine. So it is hard for people to doubt that they are, question whether or not they're being scammed. Given the hostile environment that far too many people have to deal with, it seems entirely possible to me that people would believe that they were being faced with immediate eviction from the country, in immediate deportation. I can understand why they would panic. I had a small experience of this in that we lived overseas for many years and came back. My son was born in Scotland. My husband and I both are Scottish, and he has a Scottish passport, a British passport. He has he's on the electoral register. He goes to local school, and in order to get a national insurance number, because my national insurance number was destroyed at the same time as the Windrush document, so my paper records from the turn of the century were destroyed. and we had to present. I had to present my son for an interview for him to be able to get his national insurance number to prove that he had the right to stay in this country. Now, as Scottish people with the inviolable right to be able to be here, even we were disconcerted, thinking, well, hang on a minute, what's going to happen? What happens if they say no? They've already lost his documents. They've already destroyed my documents. That's how I'm feeling, taking my son to go. I can't even begin to imagine what somebody who's newly arrived in this country or who's living here on a visa, how unsettling that must be. So yeah, I can understand why people start reaching for their checkbooks to try and stave off the legendary and far too well known incompetencies of the Home Office under the hostile environment.
Yeah, well, we have got advice here from the police. They have said, if you get a call of this nature, hang up immediately. The Home Office will never ask for money over the telephone and only uses reputable, secure payment services. You can obviously contact the police on 101, or you can report to Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111 for any kind of scam, any kind of crime, although obviously this one particularly disturbing given the nature of it and given the people who are being targeted. Now, in other news, minimum alcohol pricing has been studied by NHS Health Scotland. They've looked into the rollout of the policy, and they've said that the policy has been successfully implemented and is starting to have some positive effects. There have been some stories in some of the perhaps less reputable news media talking about people going on the equivalent of booze cruises, driving just over the border to pick up alcohol and then bring it back. I struggle to see how that could work unless perhaps you lived in Annan or you drove to Carlisle for your messages anyway. But in general, it does seem like the policy has been a success. What's your experience? Have you noticed that your tipples have gone up in price? Are you even a drinker? Sorry.
Well, I wouldn't call myself as a drinker, but I have been known to enjoy a libation. I haven't noticed that there's been an increase in price. I've noticed that the price of butter has gone up, but I haven't noticed that the price of my favoured gins have gone up. I think that perhaps for people who are at the end of the market where every penny counts, perhaps that has been noticed. I suppose it's the same kind of effect that you notice with cigarettes. I mean, many years ago, you could buy single cigarettes and they weren't that much, I guess, and then suddenly they escalated. I can't see that you're going to get busloads of people driving from Aberdeen to go and buy a couple of bottles of Buckfast cheaper down in Cumbria, if they even sell Buckfast down there. But anything which is going to help curb the horrific effects of alcohol abuse has to help. I had a friend at the age of 24 who drank himself to death. And going to his funeral was one of the saddest things, because he was a nice guy. He was just a guy gripped by demons. And you know what? If paying a wee bit extra would have meant that he'd made it to 25 or 26 and maybe had time to get help, then I think that his family and certainly his friends would have welcomed it.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like it's not going to change everything, but it is one small step. Like you say, for a long time now, there has been just a continual ratcheting up in the price of cigarettes, and that has helped a lot of people. There are I know many people throughout my time who've said, well, when it hits a £5, then I'll quit, and when it hits £6, then I'll quit. And a couple of them didn't necessarily hold to those promises, but now that the prices are way up and we've kind of made it socially less acceptable, it does seem to certainly be that smoking is much, much less popular than it was. And I agree with you. I think if minimum pricing can make some difference, even if it is just at the margins, then every step in that direction is a good step. Would you agree?
Yes, there's a couple more points to it though, and I think one of the reasons why we haven't noticed a difference is because the supermarkets have been using alcohol as a loss leader to get people in the doors, or it's kind of, they've been using it. Supermarkets aren't the bad guys in many respects, I know. However, there are some things they do which I think is more than a bit sneaky. So I live in a small community, and the supermarket here has gone from just selling your tins of food and fresh fruit and veg. They've put in a bakery, and now they've got a wee coffee machine, and they've started selling some garden products, and then they started selling flowers. Well, there's only so much that the local shops in a community can absorb. And I know that there are shops in my community which are really feeling the pinch. People not going to buy bread from them, not going to go and get their grow bags from the local ironmonger. And I know that the pubs in my area really feel it. And what I would like to see happening with minimum pricing would be for it to be a wee bit more expensive in supermarkets, but for it not to be hitting pubs, so that there's perhaps more of an incentive to go and socialise while you're drinking, rather than people sort of getting a carry out and perhaps drinking in isolation or drinking in a way which is less sociable. My one of my eldest child is a young adult now, and at university, and they talk about having prees, which is they all go around to somebody's house and take a few shots of whatever slammer seems to be on the go, and then go out to a nightclub. So they're completely avoiding the whole pub experience. Now, when I was a youngster, I didn't drink. I wasn't really much of a one for a drink. I just liked drinking water or soft drinks when I was out. But I loved going to the pub, and I loved hanging out, and I loved the crack, and I loved meeting my pals. And I think that is something that perhaps we should be having a conversation about, not just about the price of alcohol, but the way in which it's consumed and the environment in which it's consumed. And I think there's quite a lot we could do to encourage social drinking in a wider context where there's stuff happening, rather than people just going and getting hammered before going out to a nightclub to get hammered even further. So, I don't think that we're quite at that point where the conversation has come into a fully meaningful way in the wider society. I really think that we need to have a conversation about the way in which people drink, and let's make it sociable again.
Well, I mean, it's a big job for Scotland generally. Drinking is something that our drinking culture is something that we definitely do need to have a very long, very complex conversation about that sadly we won't have time for tonight. What we do have time for though is to talk about your specialist subject, which is Scottish branding. Now today the SNP spokesman on European and Foreign Affairs, Stephen Gethins, was talking about the spending that the British government is putting into planning for a no-deal Brexit. This is now up to £6 billion. And it does seem very much as though the preparation is for no deal. This is not a just in case. It does seem to be that most people are now viewing no deal as inevitable. Now, you are involved with Keep Scotland the Brand, which is all about making sure that Scotland's brand as a place of high quality produce and whatnot stays strong. But the EU provides particular protections on PGIs, which is protected geographical indications, which, as you were saying earlier, things like Arbroath Smokies and Stornoway Black Pudding. Could you tell us a wee bit more about the Keep Scotland the Brand campaign and really how you got into it and what you're trying to achieve with it?
So, as I said earlier, I worked for many years as a journalist up in Orkney and Shetland, and I had a real focus on farming and the fisheries and rural communities and the economy. I think very for square mesh and diamond mesh netting debate. That's a phenomenon. Extremely successful, the way in which Scotland's food and drink producers and our tech sector and our textiles and our medicines and our veterinary sciences are known and respected around the world. So when I realised that that I was alerted to the fact we were in trouble when I was looking at the Canada, EU, Japan, CETA trade talks. A couple of years ago, I was watching it progressing, and it was a podcast, a Farmer Jonesy podcast, which for those of you who are interested in matters agricultural, it's always worth checking out. And it was a comment that had come off that about Scotch beef and Scotch lamb farmers being very concerned. And so I looked into it a bit, and it was during the trade talks, which are now in force. We now have the benefit. We've seen quite a lot recently of politicians talking about how fantastic it is that we've got trade, being able to sell Scotch lamb to Japan. Well, that's part of the EU trade deal, that we have that possibility now. Same with Singapore and Canada. So as part of that deal, which is now in force, the European nations were invited to have a conversation about PGI. As part of WTO, every signatory to WTO should have its own GI scheme. And across the continent of Europe, 3,000 food names were put forward for protection. And the United Kingdom government, which is as a member state, has responsibility for, I think it's 86 or 87 now it is, PGI from across the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. And they did not submit one name for protection. And that caused me great concern when I looked at that and thought, well, why should that be? And they were questioned about it. The Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, now headed by Theresa Villiers, but she wasn't there at the time. And they were questioned about it at the EFRA Select Committee, and quite breezily said, "Oh well, don't worry, we can retrospectively put names in if we decide we want to." And for whatever reason, they said that, but that's not the case. They may have been mistaken, but it was not a truth that was uttered, because you can't retrospectively just pop it in. It has to be renegotiated. So currently, the precedent has been set. Currently, in the Japan trade deal, in the Canada trade deal, not one of our PGI is protected, with the exception of Scotch whisky. But the Scotch Whisky Association is pretty unique in that they have custody of their own the Scotch whisky PGI. So that's not down to the UK government to protect it. They fiercely guard their name across the world and do a very good job of it. So the precedent has been set that going forward, the GI scheme, even as part of the EU still, our food and drink is not protected in Canada and Japan. And so when I saw the new GI regulations that were brought out earlier this year, and I read through the proposal, just really with a sinking heart, because when you're talking about a legal document, the presence or absence of an Oxford comma can make the difference, a massive difference. One word can make all the difference in a legal document. And this PGI, this GI document produced by DEFRA, it's got more holes in it than your dad's string vest. It is. I'm laughing about it, but really I want to cry, because if this is the level of protection that we will have going forward in future trade deals, and we're talking about the EU, but actually the precedent, every trade deal that is done going forward after we leave the European Union, currently the European Union is the world's most successful economic bloc. It has got trade deals with over 1/3 of the world's economy, and as part of those deals, our produce is protected. And every deal that is done thereafter, after Brexit, the government, UK government, the GIs are up for negotiation. So each time we do a trade deal, our GIs are up for negotiation. And that worries me very, very much. The Americans have made clear. I was talking to somebody, a food and drink leader, a businessman, phoned me up one day, and he said, Ruth, he said, I've just had dinner with the American ambassador, and he said, forget Keep Scotland the brand. The Americans don't want UK the brand. They don't want anything which is going to allow. They don't like food labelling. They don't want anything which is going to allow. And he sort of air quoted it over the phone. He said, which will allow us to discriminate against their food, because people will very quickly realise that American produce is brought to our tables at a much, much lower standard. Americans have got 10 times the rate of food poisoning per head of population than we do. And their animal welfare standards are, America can produce the best in the world, but it's also got some really shocking standards. And apart from the ethical aspect of an animal welfare point of view, our food and drink producers just can't compete with the stack 'em high, sell 'em low. So we have to have our food standards and our high food standards and our high animal welfare standards maintained. But it's hard to get a premium if we can't guarantee that we have the thing about divergence and convergence, that our standards still are at a level that the European Union recognises. And it's going to get very, very hard if we start having feedstuffs being imported which we can't trust, or if our food is being tweaked in various ways. So I'm deeply, deeply concerned about what's going to happen to our food and drink sector going forward. Apart from the food justice aspect, the whole thing about our economy, when 1 in 5 Scots is involved in our food and drink sector, we could be really hammered.
So with Brexit expected now to happen on the 31st of October, does that mean that on the 1st of November anybody can suddenly start producing, say, Arbroath Smokies without...
That's my understanding, yes. If there's
Okay.
a hard Brexit, then the food protections that we have enjoyed as part of the European Union will cease to exist. And because there is no deal that has been fully ratified, then there are no protections anywhere. There will be no protections anywhere in the world for any of our food and drink names apart from Scotch whisky, is my understanding.
Okay, but Scotch whisky would still be protected in that situation? Because there's
Scotch
been a
Whisky
lot...
Association has done an extremely good job of sort of carving out, protecting their own PGI. One of the issues I understand that might affect Scotch whisky, the Americans were wanting to run a deal which meant that their whisky was called Scotch, and I think that one's been kicked into the long grass. But now what I am seeing is that the Americans are attempting to shift the playing field, because they've realised that one's a non-starter, they are wanting the definition of Scotch to be changed. So they are very keen on what's called accelerated aging, which would just completely change the nature of Scotch, and to remove the requirement that it be aged cask aged, and so that I think that there will be other challenges to the supremacy of Scotch, and it's like anything. If you're not, anybody who's ever seen a David Attenborough, if you've watched David Attenborough waxing lyrical about herds of wildebeest cantering across the African savannah, then you know what happens if one of those wildebeest starts trotting off towards the lions. It doesn't end well. So that is my concern, is that unless we have an extremely robust commitment from the UK government, who are the people that are in charge of our GI, then we're going to be the lonely wildebeest trotting down a dusty road. It's not going to end well. and the European Union has been extremely robust and powerful in ensuring that, for example, Canada accepted 3,000 food names.
Okay. Now we are running quite short of time here, so I just have two more quick questions. One is, would these PGIs still apply within the UK? Would Scottish branded produce still be able to be made in England, say, and still called the same name? So could somebody smoke a fish down south and call it an Arbroath smoky? Is that something that's
well, you've
that's
just really depressed me, because I hadn't even thought about that as a possibility. But yeah, I suppose it would depend on. I suppose in principle no, because the UK does have, as part of the WTO, being a signatory to the WTO. My understanding of reading it is that would not be the case. I suppose it would be interesting to see what would happen if somebody tried. I don't think so. I think that the UK's perspective is that that the definition of an Arbroath smoky, for example, being a piece of fish that has to be smoked within a 6-mile radius of a particular part of Arbroath, I think that would continue to be within the boundaries of the United Kingdom. It just would mean that pretty much everybody else could call their fish what they wanted to, and there's not a lot we could do about it.
Okay. And just finally then, what can our viewers do to help if they want to get involved in helping to protect Scotland, the brand? What can they do to help?
Oh, there's just so much. You can go to the website, which is www.keepscotlandthebrand.scot. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. We've got leaflets that can be handed out, go around farmers markets, just speak to people. Lots of ideas on the Facebook page. But speak to elected representatives, speak to your supermarket managers, speak to your neighbours, speak to folk on the bus, tell them why it matters that we keep Scotland the brand. Have a look at some of the material on the website, get a wee bit informed about it, and then just tell people why it really matters, because a lot of folk, I went round all the Arbroath smoky producers one day and I told them what was coming, and not one of them knew that was on the agenda. So I think that it's really, really important, whether you're a Scotch beef farmer or a fish processor, it's really important you get informed and find out what's coming, because information is power, and talking to each other and contacting every politician from every party. This is not a party political issue. We all have to eat, and it really, really matters that we have access to good quality food in a thriving economy.
Well, Ruth, thank you very, very much for your time. I'm sure our viewers will take that issue very seriously. It's not something I knew a great deal about, and I'm very grateful to you for coming on to talk about it. Thank you so much. We are unfortunately out of time now for Scotland at 7 tonight. Before we go though, we just want to tell you, producing television programmes is a very expensive business, even though you might think I'm fairly cheap. To allow us to continue to make programmes and pay the bills to keep this studio running, we do need more of you to sign up as Broadcasting Scotland supporters. Your £5 a month will help us to continue making Scotland at 7, making the full Scottish on Sunday, and there are a wealth of things that we would love to do if we had the resources to make them happen. We can only do that with your support, so please sign up on the website. It's www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register, and that's where you can join up as a supporter. In the meantime, thank you again to Ruth Watson for joining us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again very soon. Thanks very much.